This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Lumos by Imparfait, composed by Burning Aurora, Caliana, and Flowerhawk. December 1976. Chapter 1, James. Above quality Quidditch supplies on the third floor of a tall, leaning building in Diagon Alley is a dimly lit little restaurant called Tippy's. For generations, it was brass and Polish, owned by an old, mostly pure-blood family, the Peabodys. Brass and Polish was the finest dining a wizard could get in London. The last of the Peabodys had been a large, boisterous man named Frampton, who left the whole operation to his house elf, Tippy, when he died in the 60s. She was a mad little house elf freed by Frampton in his last days, and she ran her restaurant with an iron fist. James Potter knows this because James has been going to Tippy's for solstice dinner since he was a wailing, toddling baby. Everyone does, or tries to, at least amongst the families that still celebrate the old ways. Tippy's books up for the high holidays years in advance. The Potters have a standing table for the solstice meal, a good one by the window that they've held for generations. They're next to the Malfoys, which is the cause of his current dilemma. Mum and Dad seem to think it's not going to be a problem, but Lucius married Narcissa Black in July. James knows putting Sirius in blasting distance of Narcissa is going to be the ultimate end. Tippy herself has no patience for feuds, and would sooner throw a wizard out by his ear than risk crossed wands in her dining room.
You
James whispers furiously to Sirius as they take their seats at the table.
have to behave tonight. In fact, just stay in this chair, or so help me Merlin Sirius. If Tippy kicks us out, we haven't got a table for the rest of our lives.
What if I want a drink?
He whispers back.
You deprive me of finally being able to go to the bar and order a whiskey for myself.
Oh yes, just what I need. The Malfoys behind me, and a drunk Padfoot beside me.
I promised Mum I'd behave already.
Sirius says, waving towards Mum over at the Longbottoms, laughing with Augusta.
And Mooney.
James cranes his head around Sirius and looks at Remus.
Did he?
Promises were made.
Remus quirks his lips up into a besotted little smile.
He'll behave.
Disgusting.
James says cheerfully.
Dad's at the bar. I'll tell him what you want.
Going to piss for me too, Potter?
Sirius asks.
Fuck off, or I'll get you a Daisy Root Draft Charmed Pink.
James threatens as he stands.
Sirius wants a dragon's breath.
James says to Dad as he comes up to his back at the bar.
I told him he isn't allowed to stand, so he sent me.
Dad turns and gives him a funny look.
Why on earth would you tell him that?
I'm not getting kicked out of Tippy's because he's got a temper and too many cousins.
James says.
They're your cousins too, you know.
Dad says, but he turns back to the barman and says,
And a dragon's breath.
Distantly, by marriage.
James does not want to consider blood relations with Bellatrix Lestrange, whose hideous laughter he can hear from halfway across the restaurant. He suddenly finds himself lifted off the ground and in a crushing hug. All he can see is a shock of red hair in front of his face.
Little James Potter.
Gid Pruitt sets him down on the ground and holds him at arm's length, looking him over.
Not so small anymore, are you? Look at you. I can still remember chasing you around in your nappies.
James turns scarlet and laughs.
Suppose not. I shot up 4 inches since last year.
And you weren't here last year for me to see it.
Gid says.
It was the talk of the town. Where's the Potters?
James glances back to the table where Mum is sat with Sirius and Remus.
We spent last Yule picking up a stray.
Oh, I know.
Gid says, peering over James's shoulder at the table.
That got around fast enough, as soon as the Blacks showed up short one.
James searches himself for outrage at Walburga and Orion making their reservation last year and finds none. He's glad Sirius ran away, even if that meant James spent most of his winter break last year keeping vigil and watching Sirius alternate between falling apart and pretending to be fine. He gained a brother, and Sirius is happier now than James ever thought he'd be.
All gossip last year then, Gideon.
Dad asks, turning toward them.
Good to see you again.
Monty, that's half the point in coming, isn't it?
Gid shoots back. He's laughing as the barman passes him his drink.
A good meal and a show every year at Tippy's. Bet there's going to be something to talk about tonight, too.
He tips his glass toward the back of the room, to the single empty table between the Rookwoods and the Parkinsons where the Black family usually sat.
Not from the Potters, there won't be.
Dad says. James deeply, deeply hopes he's right. He wants that table for the rest of his life, So he and Sirius have a place to bring their families on Yule, for birthdays and anniversaries, for celebrating his own future Sprague's Hogwarts letters, the same way Mum and Dad brought him to Tippy's with his letter still in his hand.
I'll have to hold out hope for Walburga to have a breakdown.
Gid looks put out at this.
It's very muggle of them, isn't it? To care much about Sirius's inclination for
He peers at Remus.
a swotty-looking brunette.
I think that's the title of one of Sirius's love sonnets.
James tells him. It pulls a laugh out of Gid, and James has to physically stop himself from preening. Gid Pruitt taught James everything. James knows about mischief, when he looked after him in the summers, when James was small. Making Gid laugh, that's something to be proud of in James's book.
How's Fabian?
Dad asks.
Still out in Istanbul?
He is. Happier than a bow truckle in a forest out there. I think he's met someone, but he's keeping it all hush-hush, even to me.
He taps his fingers on the bar top idly.
My sister had another Sprog this summer. Named him Percival, poor thing.
Pass along my congratulations.
Dad says. He drops a few sickles in the barman's hand when he slides 3 drinks towards him.
Their flat must be getting crowded.
Oh no, they've moved. Arthur got a piece of family land when his grandfather passed on. It's not much, but there's more space than they had in Hogsmeade.
Dad passes James the dragon's breath.
Bring it to Sirius.
He says sternly.
And tell your mum I want the lamb tonight. I'll be along.
James rolls his eyes, but he knows when he's been dismissed, so he takes the goblet of dragon's breath carefully in both hands. He considers taking a sip of it as he crosses the room, but decides against it, because he knows Dad's still watching. Next time they're in Tippy's, he'll be able to order as much elderflower wine as he wants, which is quite a lot, and no one will be able to stop him. James pauses on the way back only once to watch Arcturus Black sweep in past the host's stand and take a seat at the black table. He's scowling, glaring across the room. When James follows his gaze, it's to his own table, where Padfoot has an arm tossed over the back of Mooney's chair, leaning over his shoulder and gesturing at the menu. Good, James thinks as he hurries back towards his family. He's glad they're upset. True to his word, Sirius behaves. He barely glances back as the rest of the blacks make their way into Tippy's and join Arcturus. When Narcissa and Lucius arrive behind them, his wand hand twitches, but he says nothing. They make it through the soup course, talking about how Quidditch is going. James recounts Evelyn Hammerhead snatching the snitch out from under Hufflepuff's rookie seeker, while Remus rolls his eyes at James's creative exaggeration of events, and Sirius sips his dragon's breath. Mum asks Remus about his holiday plans, and Remus finds himself explaining Christmas to Mum, again for what has to be the 2nd or 3rd time. James loves his parents. They're both smart as whips, but sometimes Muggle things just don't quite stick. By the time the bowls are cleared and Sirius is on his 2nd dragon's breath, James feels calmer. The Malfoys are sedate behind him, talking in low voices in that hoity-toity way they often do, and it's easy for him to drown it out in favor of Sirius's story about the time in November they exploded a cauldron in potions and wound up covered in a sticky green goo that even Slughorn couldn't spell away.
Incidentally,
Sirius says casually as their manes appear in front of them.
is my grandfather still trying to wandlessly light me on fire?
James spares a glance back at Arcturus, whose hard gaze is still fixed on the back of Sirius's head.
Sure is.
He answers.
Might as well give him something to glare about.
Sirius says, and panic spikes James's heart rate back up. Sirius doesn't stand, he just leans over towards Remus, adjusts the collar of Remus's dress robes, and gives him a kiss. It isn't even a particularly salacious kiss, too dry and close-mouthed to count as much more than a peck. James personally has seen far, far worse from the two of them. The chandelier over the black table explodes in a shower of glass. Sirius leans back into his seat, looking far more like a satisfied Kneazle than he had any right to.
Good old Walburga.
He says.
Warn me next time.
Remus tells him.
If you wanted to put on a show, we could have.
Didn't.
Sirius says, reaching out and smoothing a hand down Remus's sleeve.
Just wanted to anyway. An explosion was a bonus. You look fit in dress robes, Mooney.
James makes a gagging noise, but his heart isn't in it. He's been thinking more and more lately about how Remus is going to one day be his brother-in-law. He likes the picture that's conjured itself in his mind now, unbidden, of all of them sitting here together years from now. Padfoot and Mooney still acting like lovesick teenagers. maybe a beautiful woman with long, wavy red hair on James's own arm. A tiny miniature version of himself, learning how to eat clams the proper way. It's a good future. Sirius elbows him, and he shakes the thought out of his head. Orion is stalking across the room towards them, looking downright murderous.
Sorry, Prongs.
Sirius says. He shoves his wand at James, who takes it and slides it into his robes next to his own. Remus edges closer to Sirius. His eyes are hard. James understands the feeling.
Cousin.
Orion says to Dad when he reaches them.
Orion.
Dad says. He still seems unbothered by whatever is happening, and James wishes he had that kind of confidence in Sirius and Orion to not explode in a hailstorm of curses.
Happy Yule.
Orion inclines his head to him.
You've brought guest?
No.
Mum's voice is light, but James can hear the anger laced through it.
You know our son James, and of course our son Sirius. He's brought his intended, but Remus is practically family already.
Orion's jaw twitches.
I see.
He says.
Sirius just turned 17.
Dad tells him.
So it's a bit of a belated coming-of-age dinner as well.
James is gape-mouthed, struck dumb by his parents' absolute nerve. He didn't know they had it in them.
Congratulations.
Orion manages to get out between gritted teeth. He's not looking at Sirius, who is staring at Dad and Mum with a gobsmacked face that likely matches James's.
Topped the term at Hogwarts, the both of them. We're that proud.
Dad inclines his glass of elderflower wine toward them before he takes a sip.
How are your boys?
He asks.
Regulus is fine.
Orion snaps.
Happy Yule, cousin.
Lovely to see you.
Dad calls to Orion's retreating back. He waves the warming charm off his lamb shank and looks up at the three of them, the start of a smirk pulling on his lips.
You're all going to need to learn. There's ways to get one up on someone other than jinxes,
he says.
Sometimes words have more power.
Chapter 2, Lily. 3 days after Christmas, in the early afternoon hours, the Evanses are gathered in the parlor when there's a knock on the front door of 36 Marigold Lane. They're not expecting company. Lily's the closest to the front door, so she gets to her feet, pads into the front hall, and swings it open, and stares, gape-mouthed, at Sirius Black standing on her front step. He's dressed muggle, in denims and a faded black Beatles shirt, graphic half obscured by a dark blue peacoat left unbuttoned and open at the chest. His boots look as if he recently shined them. His hair is down for once, neat, shiny curls spilling over his shoulders.
Hello, Evans.
He says with a huge grin. His eyes are bright and happy, sparkling gray. She takes a deep breath. Remus Lupin is, she thinks, a very lucky man.
Sirius.
She draws out his name slowly.
What are you doing here?
Came to visit, didn't I?
He says.
I'm here to spread some Yule cheer to you, Evans.
She glances back in the house. The telly's on in the parlor. Some daytime drama. None of them are watching, but Mum won't let Dad shut off. Her mother's in the kitchen, rattling through the cupboards. Petunia's upstairs, probably chatting to her new boyfriend about what a horror it is to have Lily at home. If she's very lucky, Petunia will stay there.
Who's at the door, Lily?
Her dad calls from the parlor.
Don't leave them standing in the cold, dear.
Sirius Black does not belong at 36 Marigold Lane, but she lets him in. She takes his coat in the hallway and has a quiet mental breakdown as she hangs it on a hook by the door. Petunia is already in such a foul mood. Her parents are always so nervous about the magic, and now here's Sirius Bloody Black in her front hall, looking fit and charming and like the devil himself. She turns back to him.
They're muggles, Sirius.
She whispers furiously to him.
I know that,
he says.
It's not as though I've never met a muggle before. Mooney's mum is a muggle.
Who's married to a wizard?
So,
he gives her a blank look and she lets out a quiet, frustrated scream.
You...
One dark eyebrow arches up toward his hairline, imperious, almost regal. This is going to be a disaster.
Lily who?
Mum comes around the doorway from the kitchen and stops, taking in Sirius and Lily standing in the entry. A grin blooms on her face.
Oh, hello. And who's this?
Sirius Black,
he says.
Lily's friend from school.
He sounds suddenly different. The lazy edges of his words tightened up, sharper. Posh fucker flits absurdly through her head in a voice suspiciously like James Potter's.
You must be Lily's mum. It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
He strides toward her and offers his hand. Lily thinks she's been stupefied. Or perhaps this is a nightmare, because her mother shakes his hand and gives Lily a knowing look over his shoulder.
Sirius Black,
She says, beaming at him.
you're the one who sent the chocolates.
The very same.
He says.
I hope I'm not intruding.
No, no, of course not. Please come in, I'll make some tea.
Mum looks him over once more, and then looks to Lily.
Take him in with your father, dear. Don't make the poor boy loiter in the hallway. I'll be in quick as can be.
She bustles back into the kitchen with a waggle of her eyebrows, and Lily lets out another near-silent scream.
What's that about?
Sirius asks.
Do you have a condition, Evans?
You're my current affliction.
She whispers at him.
She thinks we're seeing each other.
Sirius crinkles up his nose. He looks down at himself and then gives her what might count as an ogle.
Us.
You sent me chocolates.
It's Yule.
He whispers back furiously.
It's a very traditional gift.
They're muggles and they don't know that.
Well, you could have told them.
He says. He palms her shoulders and looks her over again from arm's length.
I can't pretend to date you, Evans. I just don't have it in me.
You don't have to pretend to do anything.
She says, then reconsiders.
But, Sirius, muggles aren't as... What I mean to say is...
He waves her off.
I shan't discuss my proclivity for buggery with my dear friend Remus Lupin around the muggles. Hope already gave Mooney and me that talk last summer when his gran visited. No fear.
Sirius?
Her dad says, testing the name in his mouth.
That's a star, isn't it?
It is. I'm named after my great-grandfather, who's named after his uncle, who's named for the star.
Sirius says.
The whole family is named for stars, actually. I got off lucky. I could have been called Pollux.
Mum looks besotted. Lily realizes miserably. She's pitched forward on the sofa, hand under her chin, hanging on his every word. This is a nightmare. Mum's going to be naming their future children by nightfall. She's glad Christmas is already over. Mum would probably get her an astronomy book if it weren't, with little stickers by the names she likes.
That would be a burden, I imagine.
Yes.
Sirius agrees, laughing. They fall into the polite silence shared by people who don't quite know what to do with each other.
How was your Christmas, Sirius?
Mum asks after a moment, breaking it.
Grand,
He says.
it was my first proper one, with stockings and carols and all. Mooney, our friend, Remus Lupin, he invited me to Wales, and his mum did a nice ham.
Dad looks thoughtful for a moment.
Not many wizards in the church, I guess.
He says. Sirius laughs politely.
Oh no, there's plenty, but the Blacks have been pagan since the Dark Ages, so it's all Yule logs and solstice feasts for me.
I suppose the spirit is the same.
Mum says tolerantly.
Seems to be,
Sirius says.
at least as much as I can tell. There's a part of the Yule solstice ritual. It's a bit like praying, and it translates something like we go together toward the light, halfway out of the dark. It's fitting for Christmas too, I think. It felt that way, at the Lupins.
Lily's never considered whether or not Sirius is religious. Her own family isn't. The last time she was in a church was her granddad's funeral, before she even got a Hogwarts letter. The Gryffindors seem cheerfully agnostic on the whole, although now she wonders about them all. Severus was obsessed with wizarding paganism, furious at his mother for not raising him in it. He scorned Lily's candy cane earrings and lifted a lip at every warbling note of White Christmas. But here's Sirius Black in her parlor, a cup of tea in his hands and a happy glint in his eyes, sharing his prayers with her mum and dad. In September, she worried that she was making a poor choice, that throwing herself into Sirius's orbit out of rage and revenge was going to burn her, that she was just trading one bad egg for another. The first time she saw him kiss Remus with all the reverence of someone holding a precious, breakable thing, she thought she might have been wrong to worry. She knows she was wrong now, here in her parlor, surer than she was even just 2 weeks ago at King's Cross, watching him bound over to James Potter's parents and throw himself into his new mum's arms.
I thought you were a bully.
She said to him one day last term, and he'd looked her in the eye and answered,
I am.
She realizes now it's not that simple. Sirius loves and is loved. He knows what's right, even if he doesn't always do it. He was raised steeped in blood purity and magical supremacy, and she's never, not once, heard him say the word mudblood. There's goodness there, under rough-hewn edges that time hasn't had the chance to smooth. She wonders, sitting on her sofa in her childhood home, when it stopped being revenge and became something else. It's later, when he's pulling his coat back on and saying his goodbyes, that he stops on the front steps and looks at her. The sparkle is still there in his eyes, dimmer now in the dying light of the day.
I actually came over to tell you something,
He says.
Oh,
You can't tell anyone.
He says, sounding suddenly desperate.
Not anyone. Not even people who don't know me. Especially not people who do.
all right, so I won't.
She promises. He takes in a deep, grounding breath.
I don't have detention on Thursdays.
He says.
I haven't since last spring.
She feels like she's been thrown in ice water, suddenly cold and numb all over. This feels like a confession, and Lily isn't sure she wants to be Sirius's secret keeper.
If you're seeing someone behind Remus's,
Merlin, no.
He holds up both hands, eyes wide, gobsmacked at the very notion.
No, Evans, it'll never be that.
good,
She grumbles.
because I would have hexed you so hard your ancestors would have felt it, decree or no.
And I'd have deserved it.
He says, meaning it. She can see that clear as day on his face, in the drawn-down curve of worried eyebrows.
Godric, you think the worst of me, don't you?
I don't.
She tells him.
You just come at me with don't tell anyone who's ever known me, and I've been lying about my whereabouts every Thursday for a year, and what am I supposed to think?
I don't know. That I'm the head of the Witch Weekly reading circle, or that I'm secretly raising a pack of Krupps in the forest. Not that I'm unfaithful. I'm a bastard, Evans, but I'm not Anne, an adulterer.
She rolls her eyes.
You aren't married.
We will be one day.
He counters. She's struck just then by how sure he is, and for a moment she's wildly jealous. His eyes are brighter. He's smiling again.
I'm going to have to work on my wording when I speak to Prongs. He'll curse first and ask questions later, when I'm dead and buried under the garden shed.
He pauses and fiddles with the buttons of his coat. He won't meet her eyes, but that's all right. Whatever this is, he's ashamed of it.
I've been, well, having extra lessons.
He says, cringing, the tips of his ears going red.
With Pomfrey. I'm going for healing after Newts. McGonagall thought apprenticing would give me a leg up for applying to the programme at Oxford, which I'd like to get into because it's better than the St. Mungo's training, even if it's longer, and I don't have a clue how I'm going to pay for it. They only take 10 new candidates a term, and it's not just the Hogwarts lot I'll be going up against, it's Beauxbatons and Durmstrang and the rest of them, because the Oxford programme is the best, so I'll need all the help I can get to just be considered. So it's good, it's great, but Pomfrey wants me to start doing practicals, which means healing people in the hospital wing where other people will be able to see me, and I'm...
Sirius.
She reaches out and grabs one of his hands.
Breathe.
He looks up from the cracking concrete of her front step, more vulnerable and open than she's ever seen Sirius Black.
Am I the first person you've told?
Well, yes.
He says as though it's the most obvious thing in the world.
You won't laugh at me.
No one's going to laugh at you.
Sirius looks dubious at this.
Prongs is going to find this endlessly funny, Evans. He's going to laugh for years.
Well, all right, Potter maybe.
She concedes.
But Pettigrew probably won't. And Remus.
He cringes again, and that's interesting.
Oh, you big baby.
She says, smacking his shoulder.
Remus would sooner cut off his own arm than laugh at you for wanting to be a healer.
You say things like that, and all I hear is Remus Lupin has fooled me completely.
He says.
Prefect Lupin. McGonagall lost her mind with that one.
She swats him again, gentler this time.
Don't be rude.
To McGonagall. Never, she has my heart.
He's calmed down, she notices. She hopes that she eased whatever was going on inside his head that made this hard. It should be easy to have dreams.
Go home.
She says.
Talk to Potter and Pettigrew and Remus. Remus before the others. You should have told him first anyway.
All right.
He says, and he turns to go. She grabs his arm and he turns back to her, eyebrows raised.
What?
She shakes her head and leans up onto her tiptoes and presses a kiss against his cheek.
Thanks for coming.
She says as she settles back flat on her feet. He grins, wide and toothy.
I'm telling Prongs you fucking kissed me.
He says. She laughs and turns back to the door, watching him over her shoulder.
How are you getting home?
She asks. He waggles his fingers at her, still grinning.
Magic.
He says, and with a turn and a crack, he's gone. Chapter 3. Peter.
Wormtail.
James exclaims when Peter tumbles out of the flue in the early evening hours on New Year's Eve.
My mate, my friend, the best there ever was.
Peter wipes the soot out of his eyes and blinks up at James, hovering over him, holding a bottle of fire whiskey and grinning madly.
Hello, Prongs.
he says, casting his eyes around warily for booby traps.
Started early?
Did not.
James tells him.
Remus got here ages ago with some little canapes from his mum. We ate them all. They were delicious. You could have had some if you weren't late.
Peter laughs and wrenches the fire whiskey bottle from James's hand.
I think you've had enough for now,
he says.
I haven't, thank you, but I'll share with you.
He pulls Peter up off the carpet and into a hug that's warm and startling, which Peter thinks is an apt descriptor for all of James Potter.
I did miss you. Morocco. Your dad's mad.
It was nice,
Peter says. He takes a pull from the fire whiskey when James steps back from him. It burns in his throat and makes his eyes water. Peter prefers wine to whiskey, always has, but he'll drink what's on offer.
Grandad came for Christmas and I pulled this American witch I met at Dad's lecture.
Wormtail.
James sounds delighted.
You scoundrel, have you finally become a man?
Fuck off, Prongs,
he says.
You're the virgin.
Saving myself for Evans.
He answers.
Lily. I've been calling her Lily to her face and she hasn't hexed me.
All right.
Peter sighs.
It's not even 8 and you're bladdered. We can't do midnight fireworks if you're face down in your own vomit.
I'm not. I'm just in love.
Sirius pokes through the doorway. He's holding an open bottle of champagne in one hand.
He's reached critical Mooney.
He calls back over his shoulder.
Hello, Pete.
You've let him at the whiskey too early.
Peter says.
It's your fault. You're the adult.
He's right.
Remus's voice says from somewhere in the kitchen behind Sirius.
This is all because Evans kissed me 3 days ago.
Sirius explains. He takes a long pull out of the champagne. Peter drinks another gulp of fire whiskey. If that's even remotely true, it's going to be a long night, he thinks as he swallows.
Sirius is a traitor, Wormtail.
Prong says, crossing his arms.
He went and met her mum and dad and they think he's courting her.
He hasn't drank that much. He's just being a pillock.
Sirius tells Peter, ignoring James entirely.
And you're a two-timing hussy.
James replies hotly.
But if she's willing to kiss you, I might still have a shot.
Sirius says, straightening up and pointing the champagne bottle in James's direction.
I'm a catch. Ask Mooney.
He's a hussy.
Mooney calls.
But I'll duel Lily for him because I like him.
It takes the better part of an hour and most of the bottle of fire whiskey to get the whole story out of Padfoot and Prongs. Mooney finds the entire thing hilarious, finds James and Sirius calling each other names even more amusing, and refuses to provide clarity at all. Peter manages to figure out that James isn't actually that upset, thank Merlin, and that Sirius found Evans's parents stress-inducing in a way that Peter thinks might actually be funnier since he isn't seeing Evans and he doesn't fancy birds anyway. Peter regrets not fire calling from Morocco. Bethany Winslow was beautiful and had tits he wanted to die in, but clearly things had happened while he was away. He hates missing things. It's hard to not, since James and Sirius live together and Remus spends every waking second with Sirius, and most of his sleeping ones, if Peter's honest. He feels like the fourth wheel on a tricycle a lot of the time, nowadays.
Of course she'd fall for Padfoot.
James laments.
He's handsome and has a tortured past and is the disgraced scion of a powerful family.
I'm disowned, not disgraced.
Sirius points out.
I'm the most graced thing to come out of that line since. I don't know. Maybe ever.
Doria's all right.
She's your bloody aunt. Of course you think she's all right. She nearly got disowned herself for eloping with a Potter.
Andromeda.
Sirius takes a pull off the fire whiskey bottle.
Terrible taste in baby names.
Pot kettle.
Peter says.
Stuff it, Wormtail. I didn't name myself. And Sirius is an excellent name. Easily the best day's work while Burger's done in her life. It's fitting. Brightest star in the sky. The dog star. It's better than, I don't know, Peter, for example.
Peter rolls his eyes.
I'm named for a saint. It's a respectable Christian name, you heathen. You'd probably name a baby something like Sagittarius.
Not Izar.
Sirius says without hesitation, and Peter wonders how long he's had that idea rolling around in his head.
Take the black out of the house, but he keeps his head in a fucking star chart.
James says.
Still, it's better than, what's Andromeda's sprog called?
Nymphadora. Horrific. They call her Dora.
Sirius reaches for the fire whiskey again. He takes another longer pull.
She wants me to visit.
Are you going to go?
Peter asks. Sirius shrugs.
I've always liked Andy. She might have some useful advice on how to be poor, since I am now.
James scoffs.
Dad and Mum have more gold than they could ever spend. Plus you're their son Sirius now.
He turns to Peter with wild eyes.
Wormtail, we haven't told you about solstice.
Later, when they're all pleasantly plastered after fireworks and in those beautiful first hours of the new year, they light a fire in the garden fire pit. James scrounges up some marshmallows and he and Peter toast them. Sirius lays on his back in the grass looking up at the sky. Mooney lounges in a garden chair between them, as close as he can get to soak in the warmth. There's lots of stars out. It's cold and cloudless. The heat from the fire is just enough to keep Peter from shivering. A good New Year's Eve, all told.
I've got something to tell you, lads.
Sirius says. He sounds unusually sober for how much liquor he's put inside himself. Liquid courage, that's what Dad calls his brandy. Maybe Sirius needs it. Peter prods at the fire with his poker.
You've knocked up Evans, haven't you?
He asks, going for laughs. It falls flat.
Haven't.
Sirius says.
Wouldn't do that to my mate Potter over there. Stand up, bloke. Took me in when I was homeless.
He's buttering us up.
James tells Peter.
Suspicious behavior. Very on Padfoot.
I'm trying to be serious over here. Don't you fucking dare, Prongs.
Sirius points his wand vaguely at James, threatening. It is, Peter thinks, the most tired joke of them all. Mooney half-heartedly throws a twig at Prongs.
So you are going to tell them then?
He asks Sirius.
Got to. Prongs will break his arm and then what?
Tell us what.
James shoots a suspicious glare at Sirius.
Have you done something terribly stupid?
I've gone and gotten an ambition.
Sirius says.
Is it catching?
James laughs.
I'm suddenly overcome with an urge for venison.
Sirius tells them he gropes blindly in the grass by his head for the fire whiskey bottle Mooney confiscated ages ago.
It's not polite to eat me.
James says.
Mum will be furious with you.
I'm apprenticing with Pomfrey.
He tells them.
I want to go to Oxford for healing after we leave Hogwarts.
Oh,
James says. He scratches his chin and stares at Sirius for a while, silent.
yeah.
He says.
I suppose that fits.
What do you mean that fits?
Sirius asks, outraged.
Well,
Prongs waves his hand vaguely at Remus.
you're always pushing the rest of us out of the way to Ipisky every little cut Mooney gets. It's as though you enjoy it.
He's my boyfriend.
Sirius makes a face at the word.
I liked Euphemia calling me your intended.
Mooney puts in.
Sounds whimsically medieval.
Well, you do like it.
James says, ignoring the perennial argument of Padfoot and Mooney defining what exactly they are to each other.
Clearly. I mean, you're here telling us you like it enough to want to do it forever.
I do, but that's not the point. It fits my arse. I'm broody and mysterious. This should be shocking.
Fairly sure my mum watches a soap with a broody, mysterious doctor on it.
Remus says. James is right, though. It does fit. Peter winds his memory back across the years. Sirius is a bit of a nursemaid, and not just for Mooney. Nobody else reminds Peter to take his allergy potion every morning in the spring, not even his own mum. No one else thinks to check Prongs for a concussion after a bludger hit.
Oxmag, though.
Peter asks. He thinks of his dad's dusty office, piles of books, the hundreds of hours he spent over breaks at Oxford watching academics cry over how much work it is, and tries to imagine Sirius in it.
It's another 3 years.
Mungo's is only 2.
James says.
And if you're an apprentice, maybe faster.
Don't care about that.
Sirius tells him. He's not looking at them. He's staring glassy-eyed up at the sky. Peter wonders what he's looking at, and if it's himself, up there in the sky. Sirius does that sometimes when he's anxious, looks up and finds himself in the stars.
Oxford is the best, and McGonagall thinks I should at least try.
Remus also thinks you should.
Mooney adds.
You'll get in too.
I can talk to Dad for you.
Peter suggests.
He does admissions interviews sometimes, and he knows the bloke who reads the essays. He can put in a word.
A new project.
James says, grinning madly.
Operation Oxmag.
We agreed you weren't coming up with code names anymore after extracurricular cartography project.
Peter reminds him. Sirius laughs at that, and some nervous part of Peter unclenches. Padfoot's a cipher, sometimes, and Mooney's the only one of them with the whole key. Chapter 4, Remus. In the root cellar buried under the floorboards of Remus Lupin's childhood home, there is a windowless room with a packed earth floor. It is, Remus thinks, the safest room in all of Wales. It's his prison one night a month. As far as prisons go, it's rather nice. He's got warming charms to keep him comfortable. There is no furniture because the wolf would just smash it, but Mum leaves a nest of blankets for him every month in the spot by the left side far corner where it's warmest. There's a hidden compartment up near the low ceiling where Remus puts his wand and his clothes in the sweltering moments before moonrise. He brings a cheap Muggle paperback down with him. The wolf tears them to pieces sometimes, leaves them alone on others. It's okay. Remus can't concentrate before moonrise anyway, and he picks books from the 10-pence bin at Mr. Willard's used bookstore. The door is heavy and strong, reinforced with enough magic that Remus can almost see it in that blood-curdling moment when the full moon crests the horizon, when the wolf is burning him alive from the inside out. He closes it behind himself an hour before moonrise, and the door never, ever opens again before the moon disappears beyond the edge of the sky. Remus Lupin has been a werewolf since he was 5 years old, and the door has never opened. 100 full moon nights in the root cellar, and it stays firmly shut. So he panics, in the screaming moment when he feels the moon drowning him and the wolf under his skin, when the door swings wide open and Sirius Black slams it shut behind him. Then there's pain, then there's nothing. After the moonset, as morning breaks over the hills outside, Remus emerges from the deep place inside where the wolf drowns him, and the wolf slinks back into his nightmares. His head is pounding. He feels cracked open and beaten against the rocks, but he can't smell blood, which is a good sign for a full moon in the cellar. Sirius is a familiar, comforting weight against his side, tracing shapes on the bare skin of his hip. Remus's brain skitters to a stop. The ice-water dread of panic fills him up while it comes back to him. Moonrise, the door, Sirius's worried face blurred in his memory because his mind was half gone already. He opens his eyes and sees a head of long black hair.
Sirius.
His throat is raw from screaming and howling and screaming again.
Morning.
Sirius rumbles sleepily. And then, since James isn't here this time to say it,
Everything's all right.
You could have been killed.
He says, struggling to scramble up onto his elbows. Sirius moves like lightning, faster than Remus even on the new moon, when he feels all himself and strongest. He winds his arms around Remus's middle and gathers him up, settling them back in the blanket nest with Remus half in his lap. He presses a kiss to Remus's temple before tucking him close against his chest.
He likes Padfoot.
Sirius says into Remus's hair, working his fingertips against a knot of muscle in Remus's back. Magic seeps out of Sirius, wandless, wordless, and the pain fades away. Remus moans with relief.
I saved your novel, you know.
Sirius continues.
You think you'd have some gratitude?
Don't care about the book.
His eyelids droop. He's boneless against Sirius now, tired and warm and tingling from Sirius's magic as he works his fingers down the angry, tense muscles along Remus's spine.
I'm worried about him eating you.
Sirius laughs his soft full moon day laugh.
We played tug-of-war with a blanket and he let me win. Very vicious.
His hand stills.
I couldn't. I had to come, Mooney.
Alone.
How's Prongs going to fit in a root cellar? He'd be stuck in the ceiling with that rack of his.
Remus laughs. It turns into a hiss as pain blooms in his ribcage. Sirius' hands are there before he can take in a breath, the fizzy tingle of healing magic following the ghosting trail of his fingertips.
Hush, Mooney.
Sirius murmurs against his hair.
Rest. I've got you.
The next time Remus opens his eyes, he's in his own bed. The sun is streaming in through the window. He's got trousers on, and the blanket is pulled up to his chin. He can hear the faint sounds of spirited shouting coming from downstairs, and he strains to listen. His mum and dad stopped yelling about the full moon ages ago. He wonders if this is something new.
You gave your dad a fright,
Says his mum. He blinks at her as she leans over the edge of the bed and smooths his blanket down.
What?
He asks.
He came down to get you after moonset.
She tells him, shooting a meaningful mum look at him that he's too worn out to parse.
I was fine.
Remus says.
My ribs were cracked, but serious.
She arches an eyebrow. Remus freezes, suddenly very hot. Sirius should not have been in the root cellar. Certainly not before Dad got there. Certainly not since the night before.
Exactly.
She says.
But serious.
He
Isn't hurt.
Mum tells him.
And won't tell your dad and me how he managed it. So they're shouting at each other. Been going for a while.
Remus gulps in a breath.
Ah.
He says. He's still bone-weary. too broken by the transformation and unbalanced by the moonlight fogging up his thoughts to think of a clever lie.
You're not shouting.
At you.
She smooths his hair down against his head and smiles a sad little smile.
You're ill. It wouldn't be fair, you could hardly shout back.
At Sirius.
She laughs softly.
I did for a while. But then I couldn't understand most of what they were shouting about at all, and I thought I'd check on my son instead.
She leans down and kisses his cheek.
And maybe guilt it out of him.
Sirius will shout forever,
Remus says. It comes out fonder than he expected.
I'm sure he will, but you don't like lying to your mum.
I'm not lying.
He's technically right, but only because she hasn't yet directly asked him anything. She doesn't know what to ask, and he guiltily is very grateful for that. She taps the tip of his nose, softly chiding. The bed dips as she sits on the edge next to him.
How, Remus?
She asks him, her voice all quiet wonder. She's watched her son suffer for so long, Remus knows, and now here's Sirius with a miracle. Not the miracle, not a cure, but Mum didn't have to watch Dad stitch Remus back together this morning. That counts for something. Silence fills the room, heavy and thick, while Remus tries to make his moonsick mind come up with a lie. He wishes Sirius fed him one before he passed out against his chest, but Remus had been too tired and in pain to think to ask. His mind wasn't all put together. It still isn't. He knows Dad comes down at moonset. He knows it takes him time to undo all the warding on the door. There wasn't time for Sirius to sneak in between moonset and Dad coming down. Apparition maybe, but there's a ward on the whole house.
Remus
tries.
He's...
Remus stares down at the quilt, feeling quite screwed actually, and maybe a little upset at Sirius for not thinking for 2 seconds before he burst in like a maniac. His bedroom door swings in, nosed open by Padfoot, and Remus's heart clenches in his chest as the very stupid mutt pads across the room and hops onto the bed. He woofs petulantly, undog-like, and settles stretched out on the mattress next to Remus, hiding his snout under his paws. Mum's staring.
Remus.
She asks him, confusion laced with suspicion.
What's this?
It's not fair for you to put me on the spot like this.
Remus says to Padfoot.
I'm ill.
There's a shift in the air, a static charge that lasts only a heartbeat. Sirius is himself again, laid out on his stomach on top of Remus's quilt, face hidden in his crossed arms. Mum gasps, her hand flying to her mouth. His father is going to kill them both.
An animagus,
Dad says, a sort of guarded awe in his voice.
Yes.
Sirius answers. He's cross-legged on the foot of Remus's bed, chin up, defiantly staring down his nose at Dad. It reminds Remus of when they were firsties, when Sirius was still fighting to carve out his own identity with the Gryffindors, who sometimes only saw the Slytherin dynasty that came before him. Remus found it grating back then. He doesn't now. It's almost endearing how Sirius wards himself against people's expectations by meeting them.
And it's safe. The wolf.
It's safe.
Sirius cuts him off.
He's never so much as tried to take a nibble.
Dad frowns at the sharp flippancy in Sirius's voice. Remus wishes Sirius were closer so he could nudge him, give him some kind of warning. Dad punched clear through a wall the first time Remus got a letter addressed to Moony Lupin on the envelope. Mum cried. They didn't joke about it. Ever.
Is it? Were you born able to do that?
Mum asks. She seems lost. She's good about magic, she understands a lot, but this is something wholly new.
No.
Sirius says.
It's been about a year. Last September.
It's a spell.
Remus adds, because Mum still looks confused.
A very difficult, very dangerous spell.
Sirius rolls his eyes.
Yes, Prefect Moony,
he says. He glances at Mum.
But only when you're first trying. After that, it's as easy as breathing, I promise.
He flicks Remus's quilt-covered toes.
Don't scare your mum.
Me. You broke into my root cellar, you felon.
He's too tired to act properly offended.
You've earned Mum's Scarer of the Year. You've got the crown. No one would deny it.
Deny me whatever you want, Remus, but I'll never not try to keep you safe.
There's something in his eyes, a fierce kind of sadness, and Remus knows he's thinking about the one time he didn't. He wishes Sirius would stop letting the incident haunt him inside his head.
Last year.
Mum says, and Sirius's long gaze into the past evaporates off his face.
When it got better. When you said it was easier.
Yeah.
Remus admits.
That's why the summer was so awful, I think. He's used to Sirius being there.
Dad clears his throat.
You aren't registered, I assume?
He says.
No, I'm not.
Sirius says in that sharp, spiky voice that says, I'm still a black without so many words.
Didn't much see the point in it.
That's Azkaban if you get caught.
Dad says. He rubs at the corner of his eye. Remus thinks he looks tired.
3 years at least. More if you get sent up for impersonating an animal in public.
No, it's not.
Remus says desperately.
Since no one's going to report Sirius to the Auras.
No one's going to Azkaban.
Mum promises. She's gentle, but there's steel in her eyes. She reaches out and brushes the back of her hand against Remus's cheek. Dad raises up from the chair with a sigh.
You shouldn't have come last night, Sirius,
he says.
The hell I shouldn't have.
Sirius balls his wand hand into a fist.
Mooney needed me.
Dad's jaw twitches at the nickname.
You could have been killed.
Lyle.
Mum says.
Are we really going to tell him to stop? Look at Remus.
She smiles down at him.
Tired and sore, but in one piece.
I thought his ribs were cracked.
Sirius puts in.
But by the time I got to healing them, they were already right as rain.
Remus frowns. Sirius healed his ribs. He remembers it even through the moonlit haze that fogs his memory the morning after.
Sirius?
Dad says around another sigh, scrubbing his hand over his face.
You need to go home now.
Sirius hesitates for a moment, but he deflates. He shuffles up on his knees and crawls to Remus. He kisses him once on the forehead and then once on the lips, dry and chaste in a way that doesn't sit right with Remus. The bed shifts and he's up, padding toward the door.
Love you.
Remus says, flush rising to his face. He's never said it in front of his parents before. Sirius turns back to him and smiles.
I love you too.
He says,
I'll fire call you tomorrow.
The door closes behind him with a soft snick and Dad collapses back into the chair by his bed.
It had to be him, Remus.
Dad asks. Remus won't look at him.
Yes.
He answers.
It'll always be him.
There's going to be more shouting tonight when Mum and Dad think he's asleep. Remus will listen, but this time Remus won't cry. Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic composed by Burning Aurora, Kaliana, and Flowerhawk.